welcome to Sober Dad Crew, the podcast where we talk about all things dad, sobriety, recovery, parenting, music, tattoos, and more. For more information or to get in touch, visit soberdadcrew.com. My guest this episode is Sam Diminich. Sam is the owner of Restaurant Constance, which is named after his daughter. He's also the co-leader of the Charlotte chapter of Ben's Friends, a support group offering hope, fellowship, and a path forward to those food and beverage professionals who struggle with addiction and alcoholism. Sam, welcome to Sober Dad Crew.
Happy to be here, man. Thank you for having me.
Absolutely. I'm super excited. So I'm going to jump in. How many kids do you have?
I have two. I have a 20-year-old daughter, and her name is Constance, and I have a 16-year-old son. His name is Alan Gray.
That's funny because I have a 20-year-old son and a 16-year-old daughter whose middle name is Constance. Because
Wow.
that was my grandmother's name.
Wow. How cool is that?
Yeah, it's super cool. And the interesting thing about that grandmother is a few years after she passed away was when I was probably at the high point of what I call my medicinal drinking. And I just had this feeling one night I was holding this glass of wine and I just had this feeling of her there saying, you got to do something different. And I stopped that night. I stopped drinking that night and have never looked back. So, even though she's passed, has always been my moral compass. So like that, and I love the name Constance and Constancy, and that name just holds a lot of meaning for me. So
yeah. Well, did you know it actually means steadfast?
Yeah.
It says a lot about grandma.
It says a lot about grandma. She was, in World War II, my grandfather was in the Navy and she was in Washington State with my mom and her two sisters kind of off in the country because that was such an intense time on the West Coast. There's a lot of fear of invasion and all this stuff. So she was very small, but she was very mighty. But also probably one of the kindest human beings that's ever walked this earth.
Yeah.
Shirt off your back kind of person, and a fucking hell of a cook. Like the reason I like cooking and food is because of her.
Love it.
She was this incredible cook.
Well, hopefully you get to carry on those traditions, man, and pass them down.
Yeah. I think, cooking with kids and family has just been a huge part of my parenting world. And we actually so technically my stepson, but they're really just my kids. He's 7 going on 8, and he insisted we make a cooking video.
Okay.
And it was us making snickerdoodles, which was my grandmother's favorite cookie, and is still, I would argue to anyone, the best of all cookies, the greatest cookie of all time, I would argue, is the snickerdoodle. So we have this very funny video of us making these cookies. And
that's cool, yeah.
He's such a funny kid. There was this line, because I got out the parchment paper. I was trying to do and of course you've been on with Bobby Flay. So I was trying to do the cooking show thing. And you put down the parchment paper so the cookies don't stick. And he looks right at the camera and he says, yeah, make sure you don't use fly paper. And I was like, all right, kid, you're fucking funny. You have a good sense of humor, man. And parchment paper and fly paper humor, you can't really get better than that.
Nah, star in the making.
Yeah. So did you always want to be a dad? Was that in your brain, in your trajectory?
That's a really good question. No one's ever really asked me that before. And I can't say that I always wanted to be a dad, but I knew when I became a dad, I was kind of meant to be a dad. Does that make sense?
Oh, yeah. Totally.
There's about my children and I have a pretty, we call it an unconventional relationship. You know what I mean? There's no, the childhood I kind of grew up with was there was rank, there was mom, there was dad, and there was me, us or whatever. To think that we have this unconventional father-son, father-daughter relationships where we're equals, man, we're friends. And I think that is, it's grounded in everything that I've learned in recovery, but more than anything, it just speaks to, the kind of people that they are. which, to your question is like, was I meant to be a dad? So far so good. So far so
Still
good.
alive.
Still here. Yes.
Yeah. And I think part of that, and I always think about what you're saying, kind of is not trying to be the power parent,
Yeah.
right? It's like leading with love and respect and not trying to always be right, and like being willing to apologize, right?
Yeah.
When you mess up, because you mess up as parents, you lose your cool or whatever it is. And
Yeah.
people expect their kids to apologize. Well, you got to apologize too.
Yeah.
Like if you make a mistake to
Yeah.
people, you apologize. I mean, even your kids, right?
Yes.
It seems a no brainer to me, but the more I walk through the world and you look at other people parent, and we say this and the older two have figured it out, that the way we parent is very different than what they see with a lot of their friends. We're just
Yeah.
super open. We will talk about whatever because kids need information about sex and drugs and all the stuff. And you see other kids
Same.
out there, they're not getting the info.
No.
And
No.
it's scary out there. There's a lot going on and a
Yeah.
lot you can get into, and you got to have information.
Yeah. Yeah, for sure. I think we got to set them up for success, and that's the way to do it. Or, from a conversation standpoint, or, anything like that my parents had an aversion to talking about, it's all on the table for my children and I. I mean, they got to know, man. They got to know. It's like they got to know that they have to know about responsibilities surrounding sex
Yeah.
and responsibilities around being a dependable human being to the people that you call friends, and we have to have conversations about alcohol and drug use, and fentanyl and the world we live in now. I've been sober for 9 years now, and the world I left behind looks completely different now, and so
Yeah.
the bag of weed ain't a bag of weed
It can kill
like we
you.
knew it. Yeah, and then the pharmaceuticals, if they're coming off the street, man, those aren't what you think they are, and so we talk about all of that. 16 and 20, look, they're gonna party, so I'm not the type of individual to deny all that or try
Right.
to control a certain narrative. I just tell them, man, buy the beers, drink the beers, please don't choose drugs, all right, and there's no judgment there. There's no judgment there. If you do or your friends do, I'm a phone call away.
Yeah.
3 a.m.,
100%.
5 a.m., 8 p.m.,
Anytime.
whatever. I'll scoop you up and we'll go to Waffle House, and you know what I mean.
Yeah. And we'll
And
talk about it later.
we'll get through it together for sure.
Yeah. We'll get you safe, and then we'll get through it. And I remember
Yeah.
with the 20-year-old, when he was, I guess, middle school, probably starting, and maybe this was even too late, conversations about consent and sex. And I remember at one
Mm-hmm.
point he's like, Dad, like, I know, I get it. And I came up with this thing. I was like, look, here's like the 3 rules of consent. Number 1, you always seek active, enthusiastic consent.
Mm-hmm.
Number 2 is you educate your friends on this because they might not be getting this conversation. And number
Yeah.
3, you intervene.
Mm-hmm.
You
Yeah.
step in.
Yeah.
And I was like, that was pretty good. That was like a good parenting. And I was like, shit, that was pretty good.
Yeah.
But it's
That
also
is.
really true. And it applies to like a lot of things, but it was pretty particular, to that of a young man, like getting out there, starting to go to parties and I know there was one like incident with someone he knows who kissed someone who was drunk, and they like, he and his friends were like, you can't do that. And you
Got to
need to
advocate
go
for the
and you got to
females.
apologize.
Yeah.
You
Yeah.
can't, and I was like, damn, good job, man. Like,
Yeah.
you listened, but you acted, and he's got a super strong moral compass. So like, I don't worry about a
That's
lot of that
awesome.
stuff, but you
Yeah.
got to put it out there. You got to put it
Yep.
out there.
Yeah.
Can you kind of give a bit of your story, like, how you fell into substance use and abuse, and, what started to pull you out?
Yeah, sure. Well, I mean, really, there were two major players. One was like the family unit, essentially like 2 chapters of my childhood. One is like when my parents were together and we were together as a family. And then chapter two is when we weren't, and so that kind of fell apart. But also, like, I grew up in a restaurant family. And so I was inside that culture at a very early age. And it was very much sex, drugs, and rock and roll. Like, the restaurant back in the day it was a walking, talking, like, cliche.
Yeah,
Sex,
Anthony
drugs, and rock and
Bourdain
roll.
talked about that in one of his books. He's like, I loved it. It was like being on a fucking pirate ship.
Yeah, yeah, precisely. But just as a young man, like, it was my first impression of cooking is like, okay, they're doing it they have bandanas on, the music is up, like, it's loud. That's a part of it, right? There's the energy there, and everybody has a Coors Light, and then in between, tickets, or the rushes as we would call them, everybody goes outside and smokes a bowl, goes back inside, repeat. And so that was normalized. And even like the people that worked for dad, or my uncles, really didn't know any better because that's what they were taught.
Right.
And so that was my introduction to it. And so, coupled with, my family falling apart, that we're talking about an isolated young man, with absolutely no tools, like no tools for living, right? Mom's got remarried, she moved. Dad's, trying to figure out how to, sell enough spaghetti to take care of 5 kids, and the business as a whole. And, it was just an isolating. I think that was when I was first introduced to like emotional isolation, and being, completely unsure of myself, and with no like true person in my life to kind of lean into, or that would lean into me and mentor me, and kind of show me the ropes.
Yeah, and I think that's a very common restaurant thing, right? Is super amounts of alcohol, and it's just there, right?
Mm-hmm.
You're there during your shift, after your shift, all that unwinding. You're in that world. So then what triggered kind of recovery?
Well, to kind of pick up where I left off there, I was, I was the kid that was in counseling, at 15, 16, since Alcoholics Anonymous at 16, 15, 16, something like that, and so that was, that was my baseline. And so from there, it was like this for the next 30 years. I did high school in 3 years, not because I'm a genius. It was because I didn't want to be there, but I still did it. And then I wound up in culinary school, and figured out how to navigate college,
Yeah.
and then I went out and got a job, and then I wound up in New York at another culinary school. It's called the Culinary Institute of America.
Yep.
And I was so I was just a young man. So, essentially, I could do things, right? I could do things, and I could accomplish things. And I applied that mindset, to my alcoholism and addiction, right? If I could do this, and I can beat that, or I can outpace, this booze problem that I got going on, and soon to be pharmaceutical problem that I would have going on, and then heroin, and cocaine and crack and all that. And so that was my approach to it. Where it landed me in the fall of 2014, was in treatment center. And that was after about a year and a half of being on the street as a homeless person, flying signs, and
Yeah.
begging for food in downtown Charlotte on South Boulevard. And so anyway, so I landed in this treatment center called Any Length. It's down in Sumter, South Carolina, November 16, 2014. And I honestly didn't think that I was a candidate for recovery. I didn't think that would work out for me. I literally thought I'd be an institutionalized person for the rest of my life. And, I was, sentenced, I had this life sentence of, being a dysfunctional human being, who couldn't stop drinking, doing drugs.
So there you are. So what, obviously you're not having a life sentence, right? And you have this success. So, did that happen in the treatment center? Did it happen afterward?
Yeah. No, I mean, it was, look, that was honestly, that, it sounds like the darkest period in my life, and in a way it was, but it was also the best period of my life because that became a springboard for willingness, and and there was hope and there was willingness. It was this weird crossroads that I hadn't experienced before. And I think the reason why all that happened is that, I was in this safe space, to where I could literally fall apart. And that's exactly what happened. My bottom wasn't any beating I took on the street or, any consequence of, being outside, as they say, as a homeless person. But it was, being in that treatment center. I had, I had this, it was essentially like a moment, and it was 5 months into my stay there. And what happened was I had this moment where I realized that abstinence isn't the same as sobriety. It's not, because I was falling apart, but I didn't have a drink or drug in my system, and I hadn't had one for 5 to 6 months at the point.
Right.
And that was the white light moment for me, to where it was clear, that I could do things, I could accomplish things. I was an intelligent human being, and I was capable. And I would have to apply those lessons and the work ethic that I learned, in my early life, my parents working in the restaurants, to doing this 12-step work that I was resistant to for so long, and see about what everyone else is talking about. Right. And so from then on, I launched into this program of action in Alcoholics Anonymous. And it changed my life.
Yeah, yeah. My wife and I always talk about it's the work, right?
It's the work.
It's the work. I mean, people talk about the dry drunk or whatever it is, and I didn't do a program, but I had a therapist who kicked my butt and dug into stuff. I had depression. I had these things, and because you'll just find a way to replace it with something else, sex or whatever it is. A lot of people will go down that road if you don't dig in.
I did.
To right. So many. I mean, I think maybe especially dudes fall into that. But you just have to dig in, and it's not always fun to dig into the dark stuff and what's driving you to do these negative things, but you got to do it.
Yeah.
I mean, it's really I don't know if it's the only way. I mean, I think if you want to have a rich, fulfilled life and be a present parent, you have to do that.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, essentially, it just came down to me really digging into the causes and conditions of why I drank and used. Right. And that continues to this day. I'm a lot further on my journey than I was back then. And so I've been able to learn a lot. And I think, knowledge is actually power, especially whenever you apply it to recovery. And so it's almost like all these burdens, from your heart and your soul. And, we talk about that in the rooms all the time. It's a new freedom and a new happiness. And so it really is. It was quite a journey. It was an incredible experience. There's a lot that went on there at that place, Any Length, and, that's, incredibly impactful, and in ways that, even though it's been 10 years or 9 years, whatever we're at, it still shows up in my day-to-day life as we know it here in Charlotte, North Carolina, as a business owner, as a dad, as a human being, as a partner to my girlfriend, and so on and so forth. It's amazing.
Yeah. And of course, you've parented before and after that. And obviously that is, do you talk to your kids about that?
Yeah, absolutely. Well, I mean, they were there for it,
Yeah.
They
I guess
saw
you can't,
it, especially.
you can't help but talk about
it. Well, Constance, she had she had a front row seat for all that, and it was not pretty, man. It was not pretty at all, and I was essentially out of their lives for almost 3 years. It was gone. And so that's a long time for a dad to be away from his children. And so, yeah, there was a reintroduction process. There was an amends process. There was a get to know each other again process.
imagine a
and
trust building process.
trust building process. Yeah, but yeah, absolutely. And then it became, and that's, I kind of alluded to it earlier in the conversation about us having this unconventional relationship. But like, man, what I was met with was when I was in the reintroduction process was absolute love, arms wide open, open heart, open arms,
Yeah.
open mind, and not that I hadn't experienced that before. From it wasn't the first time I've experienced that, but in that moment, it was so profound, and I'll never ever forget it. And it's literally, um, it's the foundation for our relationship now. Because
Yeah.
they treated me as an equal. And even though I'd done all this damage, had been away, and had been untrue with words, and absent, and caused a lot of harm and pain. It was just an incredible experience, man. And I have a restaurant named after my daughter right now, actually.
Yeah.
As a promise I made to myself soon after we reunited, and it became apparent that with all the work that I was doing, the inside job, that I could be a candidate for a long-term recovery. And yeah, it's called Restaurant Constance. It's here in Charlotte. Yeah, man, recovery is amazing. I mean, it's like today we were talking about, we did a bench friends meeting. We were talking about the doors that sobriety opens up for us, and essentially it's all about possibilities. If we do the next right thing, stay in our lane, stay in our silver beam, the possibilities are infinite.
Yeah. We talk about at home, keep your side of the street clean. And my
That's a good
wife,
one. Yeah, yeah, man.
but then she goes, whoosh, 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 whoosh. So that's all she has to do sometimes with the kids, is just be like, whoosh, whoosh. And then they're like, all right, Jesus, all right, keep my side of the street clean. I get it. I get it.
Yeah,
Talk about Ben's friends a little bit, so folks know like what that is.
sure, man, sure. I talked about my introduction to drugs and drink, being in the restaurant, and I've been a cook all my life. Okay, so my grandfather was a restaurateur, my dad was a restaurateur, I'm a restaurateur, and the business has been really, really good to all of us. It's been amazing to all of us, and um, but also the restaurant business hasn't been good to the people that operate in it. We have all had our hands in cultivating a culture of unhealthy living habits and toxicity. And
Yeah.
so there was a couple of guys down in Charleston, longtime restaurateurs with long term recovery, and they got together in 2016 or 17 and started this thing called Ben's Friends, and essentially it's a fellowship for restaurant or hospitality professionals that are either in sobriety or seeking sobriety. And it was essentially a lighthouse for people that love what they do in the hospitality business, but also love living a life of sobriety, and for us to come together and meet on a regular basis, and share our ups, our downs, and anywhere in between, man. And so that started in Charleston. The Charlotte chapter, I was lucky enough to start in 2018, and so that would make us in year 6, and it's just incredible, man. I think it's important as a professional to leave our industry better than we found it, and so that's the mission. But we also, we also have got to educate as well, and so that's a big part of what we do. In-person fellowship is we're inside restaurants, we're hanging posters, we're talking to operators. We went to the food show in Chicago last year, and we got to really, really have some meaningful conversations around some of the country's most elite professionals who all have experience in either staff members or colleagues that are in the business who are suffering from alcoholism or addiction, or even worse, people that they have lost along the way to alcoholism and addiction, and didn't really know what to do about it.
Yeah, and it's respect to that, because I don't work in that world, but I have some friends in that world. But also, there's a reckoning in a lot of professions now around just alcohol culture in the workplace. But most of them have not like created their own kind of networks. And
Mm-hmm.
I'm in marketing, but I work at an architecture firm, and like that is also an industry that historically has been like really hazing related, and you know sort of toxic hierarchy and stuff that is a sense that I've gotten in a lot of some of the kitchen worlds, is sort of the higher end ones. Probably a lot of folks have like watched The Bear, and I don't know like how hyper real that is, but there's some of those flashback scenes in the French Laundry, and
Hmm.
they're trying to create maybe something that's different. And how in your restaurant do you kind of handle that? Because you're a high end place, right? You're
Hmm.
well known and established for like fine cooking. So, like, how do you make that a different environment for people?
Well, I mean, I can kind of speak to the culture that we cultivate there, and so essentially, it's this: rather than the customer being always right, the most important person in the dining room. My view is, and our view is that the team member is the most important person in the dining room. Period. Full stop. That's it. And that is, we're essentially flipping the script, on what historically has been a tradition in food and beverage and fine dining restaurants. And that's just the way it is, and so that shows up in a lot of different ways, whether it be your workload. Like, we offer a 4-day work week where you're going to get 40 hours. We're going to pay you a fair wage that is, there's no guesswork to it. We do our
Yeah.
homework on cost of living here in Charlotte and beyond. And, so there's that. And then there's, I think, from a leadership standpoint, we expect everyone, like, you're going to be challenged if you come to the restaurant and work there, and I think that's necessary, and I think that brings out the best in people. But you're going to be challenged with respect, and so as it pertains to how we operate, it's team member focused, it's wellness focused, and it's change focused as well, at what we call 10,000 feet and 30,000 feet. You know what I mean? Like, we want to change the people that are on the team that are in the YFYT family, but we also want to change our community and our community food and beverage leaders as well.
Yeah. How does the community respond to that? Do they, as a customer, do you get a sense of that difference when you're in the restaurant?
Fully supported. Yeah, 100%. I mean, there's always going to be a little pushback, here and there, whether it be the way we price or, how we choreograph an evening service. For example, we have a 90-minute seating time, and so we have a 90-minute seating time so we can turn the table, right, and do 2 or 3 seatings a night. And so doing 2 or 3 seatings a night provides us with enough financial firepower
Right.
to support the local food systems, right, to pay our people a fair wage, and also to make sure that we are setting ourselves up for success as it pertains to long-term employee benefits.
Yeah, that's awesome. There's a great bar. I'm outside Ithaca, New York, and there's this place,
Mm-hmm.
Watershed. The woman's super cool. She has a great NA menu, which also is like awesome for me. It's actually a bar for grown-ups too, which is sort of
Mm-hmm.
nice, if you're old and just want to sit down, you can get a coffee, you can get tea, you can get a beer, it's just across the board, but like a strong NA menu, and she pays them all a living wage. It is not a
Yeah,
tip-based operation.
yeah,
And that's just huge. And I think, COVID showed a lot in that world. Like, I don't know how it was down there, but so much shut down in New York.
yeah. The whole
And
state shut down.
yeah. And, a lot of restaurants didn't come back. Then there was the weird world of like, oh, you can be open. You can have takeout cocktails too, which, like, what were the essential things? Like, liquor stores stayed open. I was like, whoa. But
Yeah,
yeah, I don't know. You didn't want people detoxing, filling up the hospitals, I guess, in the height of COVID. But
yeah. I always thought that was a wise move. Whoever made it, man, that's a wise move, right?
yeah, it probably kept sort of the peace. But also, that was a
Sort of.
time when really ramped up some substance abuse for folks, and a lot of that was the isolation and all that.
Yeah,
I mean, let's touch on for a second the whole Bobby Flay thing. How was that? You beat Bobby Flay, so that
yeah.
you're on that show. Was it weird? Was it fun? Was
That whole trip. Okay, so I'll kind of start from the beginning here. So I was at Upstream in South Park. That was the job I had up until the pandemic. And Upstream is a restaurant where I thought I'd hang my apron up for the next 20 years,
hmm
and so what happened was, I had taken over there in 2017, like 2016 and 17, and I just began posting pictures of food on my Instagram account, right? No biggie, whatever. Well, the Bobby Flay show would they would scan
Yeah.
like Instagram, right? And somehow, some way they landed on my page and reached out. And it's funny. This is a cool like recovery story. And they reached out and they're like, "Hey, this is so and so from the Food Network. We would love to talk to you about coming on the People Off Play show. Let us know if you're interested." And I was like, "That's dumb. I don't even watch the Food Network. It's dumb. Like, you know what I mean? Like, I'm a real pro." And so they were like, "All right, well, let us know if you change your mind." And so they reached out another week later, and I was like, "No, I'm not interested. I'm not doing it. I'm busy. Changing this restaurant, turning things around here." Well, they reached out a third time, and the third time, I finally like recovery kicked in, and I was like, maybe I should ask someone.
Yeah.
Maybe I should, like maybe I should reach out to some of my, my well-respected friends and see what their opinions are. And so I picked three people. One was our publicist at the time, and another one was a chef. Another one was a chef, but kind of a different genre. And all three of them were like, "Dude, don't be an idiot. Say yes." And I
Yeah.
was like, "Okay, I'll say yes." But it's a cool recovery story because I wouldn't have done that, man, had I not been sober. You know what I mean? Like I would have just pulled my own strings, and that would have never
Yeah.
happened. But
Yeah. We're good at getting in our own way.
yeah, man. And it reminded me how important and amazing it is to have people in your life that truly care about you.
And maybe we'll check you on your ego.
And yeah, and absolutely. And then there was that. Yeah, there was that for sure. That took all three of them.
Yeah.
So anyway, so we get back and forth and finally get, our show schedule dialed in. And I wound up flying up there in May of 2019. And I filmed. We had an amazing time. It was a 6 a.m. call time. And I think it took 14 hours to film that episode. That was like, wound up being 27 minutes. But what was cool about it was like, I got a trip to New York. That
Right.
was awesome. Yeah.
Can't
And
go
then
wrong with going to New York.
my sister, my oldest sister lived up there, and so I got to see her. And then from a show standpoint, like Bobby was super cool, but Bob Saget was a judge, and so I got to spend the day
Oh.
with Bob Saget, and it was absolutely amazing,
Yeah. That's one of those people.
amazing.
Yeah. So I met George Carlin once.
You're lucky, man.
And so I worked at the State Theater in Ithaca, and we had a lot of like rentals, right? So like his promoter, they rented the house, they did all the stuff. And he gets there, it's like 2 or 3 years before he died. And the dressing rooms are just like shitty old dressing rooms there. And he says to the head janitor guy, he's like, "Get that fucking Steve down here right now." I'm like, oh my God, like George Carlin's like angry with me. I was like, oh. So I go down there, it's like, "Oh, hi, Mr. Carlin, like what, like, can I help you with something?" He's like, "Well, my rider, I'm supposed to have the football game. I was like, "Oh, I'm really sorry. Your publicist was supposed to arrange that for you." And he's like, "That's okay. Just these fucking small towns." But I was like, George Carlin, like, associated my name with a curse word. So I like wear that with pride. But yeah, it was like,
That
cause he was such an amazing historic kind of comedic figure. Like people, I think, forget, like
genius,
he
man.
was monstrously important, and like a
Yeah.
free speech kind of comedy thing. But also like Bob Saget, people think about him from Full House, but he was an edgy dude. Like
Oh,
his
he was dirty.
stand up was like really pretty
Yeah, he was
edgy.
dirty, man. He was dirty. He was actually like, he had a couple of like Bob Saget moments. Okay, so we started at 6 a.m. It was clear that Bob came straight from the club. And so it took a little while for Bob to get warmed up to the lines and everything that he was supposed to do from a show production standpoint. But nevertheless, man, like he was so warm and cool, and I just had a blast, dude. And I I went up there and I essentially drew up my battle plan like on the flight up there. And this is like another thing with sobriety, man. It's like to feel fear is to feel, right?
Yeah.
And that's what being alive's all about. And I remember just like having this like quick prayer and kind of conversation with myself about, look, man, you're going up here to win. You're not going up there not to lose. And so that was the mindset. But it's also cooking and it's very subjective. But nevertheless, man, I came out on top. And that was a pretty cool moment. And what happened next? And I'm not sure if you're in the loop on this or not, but like The show didn't air until January of 20. It was like January 26th of 20. When the show aired, we did this big this watch. We had this big watch party and stuff, and it was all on social media and stuff. And what happened was I had this whole new audience, and my life had changed in many, many ways, especially by winning it. Well, in March of 2020, when the world shut down, that's whenever I started the business that I own now, and I started out of my apartment. And most of the immediate success that we had was due to the new audience that I had via social media. And what's cool about that is like I filmed in May of 19, and we were hoping we'd see it like in 3 months or 4 months or whatever.
Right.
But it came out when it was supposed to come out.
The
and time
universe.
is everything. And so fast forward 3.5 years later, gosh, 3.5, almost 4 years now. And yeah, I own a restaurant. I own a business that has 5 divisions, and the Beat Bobby Flow show has a lot to do with it.
Yeah.
And I never wanted to do it. Right? Remember that?
Right. Yeah. Well, it's sort of being open and listening to people and like checking your ego, right? Because if it's like life, you remove one element in your story, even the dark shit, the hard shit, if you take some of that away, you're not who you are.
Right.
And you're not where you are. I mean, the journey, I always say to my kids, the journey matters. And no one promised you like it's not going to be hard sometimes. It's just not. I mean, life's just not like that. It's not that it's maybe not fair. It's just sometimes life's hard and hard things happen, and you have to you have to figure out how to deal with it. So you guys sell alcohol in the restaurant?
Yeah, no, it's we actually have a non-alcoholic beverage pairing menu.
Mm-hmm.
And so in the same essence of you going out or anybody going out that's a normie that would have a multi-course meal paired with multi-courses of wine, you have that option at Restaurant Constance. And they're all based on the season, and they're all locally sourced vegetable or fruit based non-alcoholic beverages. We have a tea, but tea has citrus in it.
Yeah. All right. I'm starting to plan my trip, and I've actually I've talked to a number of people in that industry. Like, do you know the All the Bitter? Do you know that bitters company out of California? Oh my God.
We have a bitters that we season our drinks with though.
Their stuff is like off the hook, cool. Incredible, and they're super cool people. They've been winning a bunch of awards, but it really is like they have a lavender bitter that at home we'll use seed lip and like freshly squeezed lemon, and they're like lavender bitter and a lavender simple syrup I make. It's like
that's so cool.
It's like magic, and it's been really because I actually worked in the wine industry for a while, and what I missed is that combining food with this really delicious, like refreshing drink, because I was just like seltzer in it for years. It was like my main liquid intake was coffee and seltzer. And then discovering this, there's something more like out there.
Yeah,
the
man.
Vinegars and like, it's so good.
Kombuchas. We use kombuchas in season 2, but the whole point is if you're in our club and you want to come out to dinner, right? We have you taken care of, you know, and so and then there's like this scenario where it's like, say you're at a business meeting and there's 4 people there, and one of the 4 people is really, really struggling with their sobriety, and the other 3 sit down, they order fill in the blank red wine, right? And then you have that social pressure, to get a glass and partake, right? Well, we have an outlet for you as well, and we have a drink called Dear Rosemary, and it's plant-based. It actually has beet juice in it. Beet juice has tannins. Tannins occur in red wine naturally.
Right.
And so we've got you taken care of. And not only do we love doing it, but we love getting better at it, which is what we're doing as well. It's awesome, man. It's awesome. You come into the restaurant, you got to check it out.
Yeah, we're a little far away, but all right, we're going to take a trip down there. I've actually also always wanted to go down there and visit because it's supposed to be a super cool city.
Come on. Yeah.
And it's just, it is cool. And I wonder where the world will be in 10 or 20 years with its view of alcohol. It seems like there's this shift going on. Like, we're probably roughly a similar age, like how much smoking was out there, I was
Yeah.
like, in high school in the
Yeah.
80s, and there's
Yep.
just so like smoking was just
Ashtrays everywhere.
everywhere.
Yeah.
Like ashtrays in cars, right? And you'd pull into the parking lots everywhere, and there'd be these little piles because people just like fucking dump out their ashtray. And cars had
Yeah.
cigarette lighters, which we now have whatever, some electronic port or whatever they call that thing. But
Yeah.
it's an interesting, the world shifts, I think, and younger people, and I don't know how your staff in their 20 are, but the people who are in my office who are in their 20s seem way less interested in like the after work cocktail hour.
No, we have so many people that don't, that do drink, that still choose the NA menu at the restaurant.
Yeah.
Like it's a significantly higher percentage of people that choose the NA menu that do drink. So I see, yeah, I mean, so I definitely see a shift happening. Are we anti-alcohol? Absolutely not. I think it's a beautiful thing, and I love to celebrate people that are artists, and are creatives. I love that, But when it comes down to what does the next 5 to 10 years look like from the trajectory that we're working with, is it's gonna I don't know if it's gonna balance out, but it's gonna change for sure.
Yeah, and it'll be interesting. I guess we're going to watch and we're going to see, and like, yeah, clearly if you're a person that, can have a healthy relationship with alcohol, like I got no beef on that, and I'm fortunate. I can go to bars. Like I like going out to shows. It doesn't faze me. I'm February 10th will be 14 years. I'm never ever tempted. We're a sober house because my wife and I are both sober. We had a sober
Yeah,
wedding in June, but I'm like,
congratulations.
thank you. I'm like, not.
Yeah,
There's no temptation there. The
yeah,
life is too beautiful the way it is.
yeah.
Like it
That's
just,
awesome.
the first years, yeah, are hard, but I always tell people there's light at the end of the tunnel, and I was thinking about this when you were talking about rebuilding with your kids, like what a beautiful story that is. And the
Thank you.
message for people is there's a way back. There's a
Yeah,
way back. And
yeah,
there's help out there to help you get there. I mean, that when you're talking about that, I was like, yeah, this is like everybody needs to know that like you were homeless, right? You're
yeah.
on the street and
Hmm.
look where you are now. It
Yeah.
it's really pretty inspirational. You fucking beat Bobby Flay. You were homeless and then you beat Bobby Flay. That should be
Took
like a
Bobby out.
t-shirt.
Well, it's interesting too. My time at Any Length was incredibly special to me. Not mainly, but a big part of that was there was a guy there named Dennis Wormsley, and he was the co-director. And Dennis had been sober like 20 plus years. This is 9 years ago, whatever, 10 years ago. And I just remember thinking, I'd been there for some months before he and I really crossed paths, and I just remember thinking to myself that I would really, really like Dennis to help me out. But he's been sober for like 20 years. What could he possibly want, with somebody like me? You know what I'm saying? It was
Yeah.
that
Yeah, it's that mindset.
yeah, a lot of self-loathing and just a lot of self-doubt. But nevertheless, that's the best I could do in the moment. And come to find out, I reached out for some help, and that man stopped everything that he was doing and sat down and had a conversation with me. And this conversation probably lasted 2 hours. That, and he was African American, and I'm from the South. You know what I mean? So this was like all this shit's like fucking groundbreaking to me. And we had a 2 hour conversation, and I left that conversation with my mind was blown because he just told me his life story, and his life story was the same life story as mine, and educated, had a family, literally walked out of the family, right? Because he chose alcohol over the love, and eventually bottomed out, and then found sobriety, and built his life back up. That also included his family. So I was just so blown away by that experience. I think about it almost every single day. But when it comes down to what recovery looks like for me today, it always has to include giving back, and giving back in a way. that mirrors the way Dennis made time for me that fateful afternoon, in the fall of 2014.
And I think that's what what anchors people and helps them get back. And I think I'm also struck by that program you were in because you were able to stay so long.
Yeah.
Right.
Well,
So
I mean,
often people get trapped up by insurance or no insurance or whatever.
well, here's the beauty of AnyLink, man. AnyLink, you check into AnyLink, there's a low admission fee. It was like $750 when I went in there. They give you 2 weeks. That covers you 2 weeks. And in that 2 weeks, you have to find a job. And then once you find a job in the city, your check, whatever money you make, it has to go to your rent. So you're paying your
Yeah.
own way. And then from a sobriety, so you're learning life skills. And many of us, I didn't know how to be anywhere on time. You know
Right.
what I mean? I never wrote a check. I was married for 13 years. My ex-wife did that. So I didn't know how to manage money. Like, this is basic shit. But I learned that at England. So it was incredibly impactful and prepared me for my exit. But from a sobriety standpoint, there is no exit date. You leave whenever you're deemed to have had a spiritual awakening already and are prepared and have taken somebody else through the 12 steps, and you are prepared for a reentry into the world, which they have transition living and all these other options, to help you prepare yourself for success in the outside world. But all of that was born out of necessity, because the people that founded Any Length Recovery, the treatment center that I went to, were parents of a young lady who couldn't find sobriety, and she kept bouncing around through Florida and the West Coast, and the parents were writing big checks to these treatment centers, and she would go and make grand promises, and 2 or 3
Yeah.
weeks after her exit, she would just relapse, and they would just repeat. And they said, "Why can't we do any better than this? There's got to be another way." And so that's how AnyLink came to be AnyLink. And then on top of that, the people that work there, there's no diplomas on the wall. They're former residents who found
Right.
sobriety.
They have
Yeah,
life's diploma.
they've been there, man. And do you know, like, how important that is in early recovery, to find another human being that has found sobriety, recovery and some version of success, like, to make that relatable? It's huge. I mean, I don't have to tell you that. I mean, you already know that, but my point is, like, this place is incredibly special, and like, the business model that they have put together is unmatched, man, unmatched. And there's a bunch of us all over the Southeast and beyond who are like alumni.
Yeah.
Like, we
Yeah.
literally have like graduating classes, and I love celebrating my friends. Actually, two of my friends went to Europe with us last year on one of my chef tours, and it's just fucking amazing, man. It's so cool. It's so cool, and I love talking about it. Obviously,
Yeah. And is that when you did the work? Is that when you got back into the restaurant world? Is that where you first found work, or did you do some other stuff before you found your way back to a kitchen?
well, honestly, so whenever I was at AnyLink, the job that I had was in this. It was got to be the dirtiest restaurant I've ever worked in my entire life, and I was like making calzones, man, and just trying to put one foot in front of the other. I had to work there because I had to pay my rent. Let's be honest here, okay? I had no aspirations of returning to the top of getting to the top of the profession. I was just trying to make it through the day at the time.
Yeah.
But what I later realized was, like, that was this massive dose of humility that somebody like an alcoholic like me truly needed, and it was the perfect place at the perfect time for me. And I look back on those days with fond memories.
Do you go there to eat the calzones?
I have been back. I don't get out of Charlotte very much, because I've been open the restaurant for the past
Yeah.
year and a half, 3 years, whatever. But anytime I'm in that town, we definitely swing by and say hello, and
Yeah.
we hug as many necks as we possibly can.
Well, right, because a place like that is also helping folks, right? They know they're employing people who a lot of other people might not employ. Like
Yeah,
it takes a lot of
it's a roll
people.
of the dice, man.
Yeah,
Yeah, and I don't forget that.
right. And then if you're someone that might have a felony, I mean, things are getting better with, job applications in states kind of banning asking people if
Yeah,
they've had a felony. But right, if you've had a felony then and you're trying to get clean and get a job, it's rough.
yeah. I will say this though, whenever I was there, I thought that still under the mindset to where, and again, like, this is one of the situations where this is the best I could do at the time. where I was like, well, I can't stay sober and work in restaurants anymore. So I guess I'll sell insurance. You know what I mean? I guess, you know what I mean? I guess I'll get like, I'll tuck in, I'll get some khakis. You know what I'm
Yeah.
saying? Like that, that's where I was at.
Yeah.
And little
Oh,
by
dark
little,
place.
I know, right? Pleated pants. Uh,
Khakis is a fucking dark place. That's like as dark as it gets.
I was in a rough spot, man.
Yeah.
But little by little, of course, so I'm working here, but the parallel to that was like I was learning how to get sober and I was doing some inner work and the change was taking place. But I really, like, I was the last one to know it. Yeah. I mean, you know how it works, right? I was the last one to realize that the change had taken place. But I soon realized that if I did this thing they call recovery, and I'm going to my meetings and I'm doing the daily maintenance that's asked of me, to stay sober one day at a time, then I can do this over here, and this is cooking, and I can still, follow my heart and what I feel like is my life's purpose, and is to take care of people. That's essentially what I do. Is I'm in the hospitality business. I hug people with food, so as long as I did this, I could do this, and so again, another breakthrough, and with God's grace, here I am, 10 years later, still lucky enough to get to do what I love to do when many, many people don't, in recovery and outside of recovery.
Well, and I think also what I see, what I was reading about your restaurant, your whole model that you work with your employees, but you're also even the way you're sourcing your food, right?
Yeah.
Is just, it seems like the basic mission of your restaurant is community, right?
Hmm.
Like you're trying to wrap up like local farmers and vendors and treat your employees well so they can live and support their families and not be overworked and all those things. Was that like the idea before you started, or has it evolved a little bit as it's moved along?
No, actually, all this. So it's crazy, but again, it is a recovery. It's a God shot story of recovery and lessons learned in the rooms. No, I was laid off in the pandemic, and I'd been buying from farms all my life, literally all my life. But when the world stopped, my life stopped. I was taught in recovery to get out of self and into service, right? And that'll take care of what's going on between the ears, right? That'll level the playing field. This is dangerous territory sometimes, but like losing your job and having children to take care, what I mean, there was a lot of uncertainty. And so I was in a really, really bad place. And so what God and recovery kind of led me to do was go to farms and go to farmers markets, right? Spend the day with them, learn more about what their day to day life was, and so that's what I did, and so that was March 17th, 2020, and what I decided to do from there was start a meal delivery service from farm to table, and so that's where the name of the business
Yep.
comes from. Your farm's your table, and so what I would do is I'd go to a farm, I'd spend a day with them, and then I would bring the produce, whatever they were growing or selling or whatever, back to my apartment. I would lay it out and create a 3-course meal, right? And it was whatever they had, and then I would cook it, I would box it, I would bag it, and I would deliver it. And so that was Your Farm's Your Table meal delivery service during the pandemic. And so that was how all this business happened. And so, yeah, the point was I couldn't imagine a world post pandemic that didn't support these mom and pop farms that supply Charlotte and the surrounding areas with their goods. I couldn't imagine Charlotte being void of these particularly passionate people who are the true heroes. Let's be honest, true heroes in the culinary world, because Charlotte's population decided to go to Chick-fil-A, and sit in a fucking drive-through, and while they're liking my Facebook post, and you know what I
Right.
mean, and just waffle frying themselves to death, while they spiral, because the political climate in the world falls apart and everybody goes their separate ways. I couldn't imagine a world like that, and so I
Yeah.
did what
I
I only
feel
knew
you.
to do, and that was to really take action, put boots on the ground, and get into it. And so what's cool about that is that was only supposed to be a holdover until upstream opened back up, whenever that was. But the truth of the matter is, the way it happened is I cooked a meal for a food writer here in Charlotte unknowingly about 2 weeks into, doing the delivery deal. And she wrote a glowing review. And I went from doing 10 meals a day out of my apartment to 30 and 40. And before I knew it, the decision was made for me. I would not be returning back to upstream.
Mm-hmm.
I would see where this business took me. And this is where we are right now. 3.5, 4 years later, I own a restaurant and 5 other divisions.
It's so cool. Have you watched the show High on the Hog? Do you know that show?
I do know it. Yeah, I do know it. I'm not sure if I've seen it, but I do know it.
It's really amazing, and it traces the history of sort of African American food in this country from like the first episode is in Africa.
Mm-hmm.
But what the thread of that for me, I loved it, and he was like an incredible host. But it's really about the importance of food and community, like going to Atlanta in this restaurant where like Martin Luther King and other civil rights leaders would meet over a meal and like plan. Importance of food in all that is just so huge. And I think sometimes we just take it for granted, be that in a restaurant or even, sort of what we were talking about at the beginning of like cooking with your kids. And I learned it from my grandmother, like food is love, right? Like, why do grandma's cookies taste so much better? Because they're made with love.
Secret ingredient.
Like my other grandmother always said, I made the Toll House cookie recipe on the bag. I'm like, I don't know. Like I make that recipe and they're not as good because there wasn't any grandma in there, like, or, my grandmother Constance, after my grandfather had like quadruple bypass surgery or something, she would go to the hospital the next day she'd make him eggs and bacon and bring it in and like a thing of snickerdoodles, and she's like, you're not eating that food in the hospital. And the hospital's like, I am not getting in this woman's way. We are not. She's like 5 feet tall. Stay out of her way because she will take you out with her bacon and eggs. Well, man, this was super great. I super appreciate it and, admire what you're doing. And like, I'm serious. I got to like plan my trip down there. It would be so cool. I'd love to check your place out.
Please do, man. We would love to see you.
Thanks for listening. For more information, for links to any music or books we talked about, or to buy some Sober Dad Crew merchandise, please visit SoberDadCrew.com.